So we have a log of this. And let's see, I might give people one more minute or so, and then we'll get started with an introduction and all that.
Great.
I see the Q&A. It's a separate box. Great. And I see your chat, your comment, Gwyneth. All right, well, I think that we will get started. I want to honor everybody's time, everyone who is here on time. And I'm going to start by introducing who I am, who we are, and then we'll dive right into this juicy content. So, hello, welcome to this webinar, Understanding and Preserving Quiet in Nature. My name is Samantha Young, and I'm the Education Manager at the Anza-Borrego Foundation. And I'm going to be your host alongside Matt Mickelson from Quiet Parks International, who you also see on camera. So the Anza-Borrego Foundation, a little background, we've been around since 1967, and we're the official nonprofit partner of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. A little park who you might have heard of, the largest state park in California, and one of the most special and unique resources that California has. We provide financial support to the state park. We acquire land in and around the park for conservation. We support relevant research in the park and connect the public to desert resources. So if you're not familiar with us and you want to learn more, you can go to the website linked in the chat. And Jamie, our communications manager, is going to be linking relevant links in the chat throughout when necessary. So we also invite you to shop at our online store, which is an extension of the official state park store in Borrego Springs on the mall. And all the proceeds from that store go to support the state park and Anza-Borrego Foundation. You can access the state park store also at the link that Jamie has just posted right there. So we're really excited for this evening. This is a topic that is near and dear to many of our hearts, the idea of quiet. Almost 1 year ago, tonight's presenter, Matt, trekked out to Anza-Borrego Desert State Park all the way from Duluth, Minnesota, to record soundscapes in the state park. And we're really lucky that tonight he's going to share with you some of the data that he collected and the sounds that he recorded. Additionally, he's going to talk about some background on the importance of quiet, the importance of protecting soundscapes in nature, as well as quiet for human well-being. He'll talk about how he came to be a major sound recordist, about Quiet Parks International as an organization. And he's going to play for us several really delicate sound files. So if you don't already have them, we recommend that you put on headphones for the remainder of the webinar. It will make the listening experience all the richer. So let's on to our presenter, Matt Mickelson. He's a sound recordist, an audio engineer, and a documentary filmmaker. He's worked as an engineer, sound designer, and producer on several award-winning documentaries, but has devoted most of his career to observing, recording, researching, and preserving natural soundscapes. He is a lovely person who you might be a little jealous of because he gets to travel far and wide to experience pristine nature landscapes. But he's not all quiet and demure because he also drives a motorcycle and has a great sense of humor. So without further ado, may I present Matt Mickelson.
Wow, what an introduction. Oh my God. That was incredible. Thank you so much for that, Samantha. And thanks everyone for coming. This is really exciting. This is years in the making, it seems. And yeah, just really excited to be here. As Samantha said, I live in Duluth, Minnesota, on the land of the Ojibwe people. I use he, him pronouns. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here with you all tonight. I also have a friend behind me, if you didn't notice the mannequin head. His name is Fritz. Fritz is kind of my best buddy in the world. He travels with me most places I go. Fritz is a microphone, and what makes Fritz special is that he hears the world the way that we hear the world. So Fritz has skin density ears, and inside of those ears are really sensitive microphones. So as sound hits Fritz's nose and the side of his head, it wraps around. So Fritz records sound the same way that humans hear. And he was getting a little lonely in my gear closet. He asked if he could come to watch the presentation. I was like, okay, sure, you can come. So anyway, joining me here is the esteemed Fritz. So I'm really excited to be here. As I said, we're gonna do a bunch of stuff tonight. I'm going to give you some introduction on myself and some background and how I got to be here and do what I do. I'll talk about why quiet's important, why noise is bad, all those kind of standard things. I'll talk about wilderness quiet parks. What is a wilderness quiet park? What qualifies as a wilderness quiet park? And then we'll really dive into the trip that I was lucky enough to take in March of last year to the desert, to Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. I'll play some sounds for you all. I'll show you kind of where we recorded, where we collected data. We'll listen to some of these things. We'll review the results of the data, so to speak. And then I'll talk about kind of what my thoughts were, what my team's thoughts were, and what's next. And we have some really exciting announcements towards the end of the meeting too. So we'll talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and then Q&A is usually really fun. So if you have questions at any point on any of the stuff that I talk about, please write them down and we'll do a big Q&A afterwards. So let's dive in. That is a photo of me. I'm probably 17 or 18 in that photo, doing one of the things I loved to do most in the world, which was play rock and roll drums. I definitely was not quiet in that time of my life. That's what I wanted to do with my life, was play music professionally. I spent a lot of time working on that goal, and at some point, maybe it was maturity, maybe I was just coming to my senses, I realized I didn't quite have the chops to be a professional musician. So I got into the recording and the engineering side of music, you know, running live sound at concerts, recording music in studios. I really connected with that kind of craft of recording sound. And I thought, okay, this would be a good technical skill to try and get a degree in. So I was lucky enough to go to Ithaca College in upstate New York and pursue a degree in audio engineering for television, radio, and music. And in my time at Ithaca College, you know, during my first semester, 18 years old, like just getting used to being in college, I was loving my studies. I was really connecting with the content, really loving like being in studios and sound designing films and all these things I was learning. But I realized that I was kind of setting myself up for a life in a cold, dark studio. I was lucky enough growing up to have parents that really valued going outside and spending time outside. I grew up in rural New Jersey. If you believe in such a thing, it's hard to believe, but there is a rural New Jersey. And so we had like woods in our backyard, and I was always out playing in streams. And then, yeah, I was lucky to like go on backpacking trips and whitewater rafting trips, and to be able to go explore some of the country's national parks as a kid. And I realized how important that stuff was to me. And so I was sitting there as a freshman in college, sitting like saying, you know, like, how can I merge this love I have of sound recording and music with this real desire to not only spend time outside, but work to protect the environment and work on climate resiliency and conservation and things like that. And that's when I heard about this gentleman. That's me and Gordon Hempton with Fritz. Fritz is featured in this photo here, and Gordon has a Fritz as well. I heard about Gordon through a friend of mine, and didn't really know anything about him. I looked him up. Gordon is an Emmy award-winning nature sound recordist. Yes, you heard that right. He has spent the better part of his life recording the sounds of nature. A big part of that work for him has been realizing that we're losing the ability to listen to nature without noise pollution. When he first started his work in the 70s and 80s, there was tons of places he could go to record pristine nature sounds. And as he started, traveling more and more, he realized that these places were being lost to noise pollution for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about. But so I heard about this guy. He sounded really cool. And I essentially decided to send him an email as an 18-year-old. And I said, the email almost reads exactly like, hey, what you do sounds really cool. I'd love to learn more about it. I have an interest in this. And he was gracious enough to get on a phone call with me, again, as like an 18-year-old college student who knew nothing. And by the end of that phone call, I had essentially agreed to and planned a trip out to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State to study with him for a week of time. And what I'd be studying was not only the technical sound recording of what it takes to record nature sounds, but also listening. And being quiet is like a big part of the craft. So this is a photo from a few years after that. But if you're not familiar with the Olympic Peninsula, it's home to Olympic National Park, which truly is one of the most amazing natural areas that we have in the United States. I can say that with certainty. And here's a photo of the Hoh rainforest taken by a good friend of mine, Palmer. And I'd like to play some sounds for you throughout this presentation. Here's going to be the first sound. What I'd say as a preface is that a lot of these sounds are very delicate. Nature is delicate. So you might have to turn up your volume a little bit. I'll try and talk a little quieter after. If you have headphones, that's great. It'll really enhance the experience. And we'll do this a few times. And I'll always give you a warning before I play a sound, so you won't just start getting blasted with sound. So this is the sound of dawn in Olympic National Park in the Hoh rainforest. I could just leave that playing for the rest of the hour, and I think everyone would be happy. I love that sound. The Olympic National Park in general just changed the way that I experienced the world. That trip I took with Gordon opened my eyes and ears to a whole new world of honestly just living. It just changed the way that I lived my life. I realized I had never really listened before. And even though I had played music and worked on recording music and was currently getting a degree as a sound engineer, I hadn't really listened. And that's what that first trip out there kind of taught me. And from kind of that moment on, I became obsessed with not only the kind of craft of recording these delicate natural sounds, these delicate pristine nature sounds, but also kind of the art of listening. Listening in itself is an art that is discussed a lot. And just like any sort of muscle, the more you use your ears, the better they become. So you may have picked up a few birds in that sound recording. You may have been able to tell what species of birds there were. They were varied thrush, and there were kinglets, and there were all these other species. You could also hear a distant river rushing. That's the Ho River. The more time you spend listening to places, the more information you can pick up. And that's true not only in beautiful, pristine natural areas, but that's true just in your everyday, even in the room that you're in now. So that whole experience just, set me down this path of trying to be a nature sound recordist. And I remember like telling my parents that this was something I was interested in. And oddly enough, they were like, yeah, that makes total sense. And we support you. I think they were a little bit skeptical, but I think they saw how much that impacted me. And that set me down the path I'm on now. The kind of nuts and bolts of what I do, and like how I make money is I'm a sound designer, essentially. So I have a studio here in front of me, which you can't see. I get hired by movie production companies and video game companies to add sound into their products, as well as record sound. So sometimes people will call me and say, hey, we need the sound of a loon. And I'm like, great, I live in Minnesota. And I go record a loon for them, which is a weird job, but one I feel very lucky to have. It's brought me to a lot of really, really incredible places. And I feel lucky every day I get to do what I do. I also have a lot of crazy stories. Like it's definitely a little bit of a rough and tumble job. Like I have a sound recording of myself getting hit by lightning, which not many people can say that they have. I've had many close encounters with wildlife, a lot of time spent cold, shivering, and hungry in the middle of very wild places. And I don't regret a second of it. So a lot of the photos that you see throughout this presentation are photos I've been lucky enough to take kind of on my travels. And I'll try and point them out as we go along. But a big part of the work, just like Gordon's work, has been this kind of realization that we're losing the ability to listen to nature without noise pollution. Even in the most remote places I've ever been, in the middle of the Amazon jungle, out in the middle of mountain ranges, national parks, wilderness areas, you name it, you still have aircraft noise, you still have military noise, you still have road noise, you have noise from distant freight trains. And, we all of us who work in this field have kind of realized that unless we do something about this to recognize these really beautiful, pristine soundscapes, they're going to be gone. And like people in the next generation won't have the chance to listen to them, or they're going to be harder and harder to find. So it was in like 2018, 2019 that myself, Gordon, and a few other really wonderful folks started a nonprofit called Quiet Parks International. Quiet Parks International is kind of the evolution of a lot of Gordon's work and another nonprofit that he had before called 1 Square Inch of Silence. And essentially the idea is that by connecting people all over the world that care about quiet and recognizing places that are quiet and bring quiet to us, we can have a real impact and protect some really special places and bring quiet to people. I think it's like an important kind of technical distinction that when I talk about quiet and I talk about silence, those are two different things. When I'm talking about quiet, I mean the lack of noise pollution. If I'm talking about silence, I mean like a recording studio is silent or an anechoic chamber is silent. There are places like the Amazon jungle that are quiet because they don't have noise pollution, but it's a cacophonous level of sound that's almost deafening. Like you can't sleep because it's so loud. So that's like an important distinction. Also, when I talk about quiet, I'm talking about, yes, like a phenomenon that happens, with no noise pollution, that is quiet, but quiet also exists within us. And we've all experienced a quieting moment, and quiet exists in many forms in our mental and spiritual individual journeys. But it's important to recognize that, there's the scientific quiet, lack of noise pollution, and then there's the quiet that exists within us. And at Quiet Parks International, we try and hold both those things at the same time, and recognize that both have a lot of value and they both feed into each other. When we put ourselves into quiet spaces, we feel quiet inside. So we are an all-volunteer organization. Everyone, including myself, the rest of the board of directors, the president, are all volunteer. And we have, essentially just set out to save quiet for the benefit of all life, is our main mission statement. And we really believe that when we work to save quiet, we save everything else in the process. From an ecological standpoint, that is an interesting kind of dissection of verbiage. What I like to say is that soundscapes are a really good indicator for the overall health of an environment. When you don't have noise pollution, you also don't have like soil contamination, water pollution, air pollution, to paint with broad strokes. Of course, that's not always 100% true, but soundscapes give us a really interesting view into the overall health of an ecosystem. Here's a map of all the places that have been nominated to be quiet places. I believe there's 270 or so points on this map all over the world that have been nominated to be quiet places. I'm the director of wilderness quiet parks for Quiet Parks International, but we have some other program areas as well. One of them is an urban quiet parks program, which seeks to recognize urban parks in large cities that are quieter than the surroundings. We have a quiet trails program. We have a quiet residences program. So these are all the places, all the quiet places that we're looking at all around the world. And if it isn't obvious, a team of like 7 to 10 people looking at 270 places it's a lot of work. And there's lots more places that we hope to look at that aren't on this map, obviously. Like all of northern Canada there's only like 3 or 4 points there, and there's a lot more to look at there. So just to give you an idea of the scope of kind of the work we're hoping to do, it's not just happening in the United States, not just happening in Europe. It's really happening all over the world. And we're super lucky to have volunteers almost on every continent who care about quiet, who want to work to protect it, who recognize it. So I know a few of them are actually on this call right now, and I feel very lucky to be able to work with people who care so much about quiet. So why is the world so noisy is a great question. Why is the world getting noisier? There's a lot of information on this. I'll try and be brief, but essentially the world is louder than ever because we have more engines than ever before, and engines aren't necessarily getting quieter. On the left of the screen here is a transportation noise map of the United States. Those yellow lines are just major roadways, and I forget exactly how they qualify a major roadway, but you can see like east of the Mississippi River is just like a solid block of yellow. West of the Mississippi, we start to get some holes in that, and some opportunities to get away from road transportation noise. That map, the yellow one, does not take into account air traffic, which you'll see in the upper right-hand corner. That's an air traffic flow chart from 2015. So a little bit outdated, but it gives a really good idea of how many standard flight routes that there are all over the United States in particular, but also in Europe and in Asia. And if you want a fun experiment, you can look at like a live flight radar of what's happening in the sky right now. And I'd recommend doing it. It's truly shocking how many planes are in the sky at any given time. This air traffic flow chart doesn't take into account like personal aircraft or military aircraft. You can do the same thing with shipping traffic. You can look up a live map of shipping traffic all around the world, and the number of ships in our oceans moving goods to and from, moving oil, resources around the world, it's really shocking. So even when you get out to the coasts, it's not like even if there's no airplanes flying over, ship noise travels super far, airplane noise travels super far. Shipping traffic has grown exponentially since the early 90s. Air traffic has like doubled in the past few decades and expected to double again by 2040, I believe. These problems aren't necessarily going to get any smaller, unfortunately, which is why we really feel the need to do work now to work to protect these quiet places. Because once a place isn't quiet anymore, it's really hard to get it back to being quiet. So noise is bad for a lot of reasons that are really well documented. This isn't like a lot of the stuff I'm talking about isn't like woo-woo tree hugger stuff. This is like World Health Organization funded research on noise pollution. and quiet, but noise has been linked to cardiovascular problems and increased stress hormones. There's been some really interesting studies done on like childhood education and noise, and children who experience noise have a lot more difficulty learning and retaining information and exhibiting pro-social behavior than children who get to go to school in quieter areas. Sleep is a huge one. Like most of us in this call right now probably don't sleep in areas that experience the World Health Organization's recommended decibel level. So sleep is disruptive. And then also just general quality of life. There's a really interesting statistic that the World Health Organization put out in 2011 that said at least 1 million healthy years of life are lost every year from traffic-related environmental noise in Europe, Western Europe. Which is just crazy to think that noise can have that big of an impact because we're always exposed to it all the time. And I think one of the things that's true is our brain is really good at kind of ignoring noise. It's really good at masking sound and annoying noise. But if you take a few minutes of your day, wherever you are, even if you're just like kind of sitting in your home and start to listen to all the noise around you, you'll realize that it doesn't really stop. Even if you're lucky to live in a really rural area, you'll still recognize that there's noise around you, which is okay. But it's something that we're good at ignoring. The antidote to all of this noise is quiet. It's like really simple. When you're in quiet, your stress hormones lower, your attention is better. You are more likely to experience things like awe and wonder and exhibit pro-social behavior. It improves your mood. It improves your cognition. It kind of improves every experience when you're in quiet. I think, this is all very human centric, what we're talking about. And that's important. We're humans. It's important to talk about us, but when we start talking about wildlife, there's so much great data collected on what noise does to animals and why healthy soundscapes are really important for healthy and functioning ecosystems. So you look at, like imagine you and I are sitting in a room trying to have a really important conversation about something, or imagine maybe not you and I, you don't know me. So you're sitting in a room with someone you love and you're trying to have a really important conversation about something big happening in life, a big decision you have to make, or a big loss that you faced, or something. And then there's just someone in your ear just kind of muttering nonsense to you throughout that conversation. That's what's happening to nature all the time. Nature is busy communicating at all times of day and night, and that communication is impacted by noise. And you look at studies of like owls and their feeding grounds, or grouse in the plains, or in the woods. There's tons of these really interesting studies about what noise does to the effectiveness of animal and bird communication. It's super detrimental to them. So it's important to have quiet for human enjoyment. Yes, it connects us to place, it connects us to each other, it connects us to nature. But it's also really important for our ecosystems to have quiet, and to have quiet be a part of what we think about when we think about protecting or preserving land. It's not just about how clean the air is, how clean the soil is, how clean the water is. We need clean soundscapes for animals and birds to be able to communicate effectively as well. I'm gonna talk now specifically about my program area in Quiet Parks International, which is Wilderness Quiet Parks. So you can think of Wilderness Quiet Parks and Quiet Parks International in general as kind of almost like a sister organization to Dark Skies, if you've heard of Dark Sky Parks. But a wilderness quiet park is essentially any piece of publicly accessible land that experiences a dependable noise-free interval of 15 minutes or more. Essentially what that means is that you need at least 15 minutes in between noise pollution events dependably, and that should happen at least once a day. A lot of people, when I tell them it's like, oh, a 15-minute noise-free interval, they think it's like a silly small number, that 15 minutes should be so easy, and that there must be tons of these places all around the world, when in reality, the number of places that experience a 15-minute noise-free interval are like, you can count on one hand almost in the United States. And I know that because I've been to most of them. It is so rare to find any natural place that experiences even just a 15-minute noise-free interval. And I always am asking folks to like do the test yourself, like go sit outside in a quiet place in a state park in your backyard and measure your noise-free interval. I think most people won't find a noise-free interval of more than 5 minutes where you live. There are places that do experience hours-long noise-free intervals. Those places are very few and far between. And I'd say that there's really no place on planet Earth that experiences complete noise-free. Even the far reaches of our poles do experience noise. Planes fly over them, ships go towards them. So we really need to work to protect these places that experience this kind of what may seem like an arbitrary 15-minute noise-free interval. It's important to have a number that we hold a standard to, and work to protect those places. Another kind of important note on what qualifies or disqualifies a place from being considered a wilderness quiet park is that any single noise event can disqualify a place. For instance, there's a really beautiful reserve or national monument in southern Arizona called Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. If you ever get a chance to go, you really should. It's a no-fly zone. There are no aircraft flying because it's a military operating zone. So on the weekends, there's no aircraft at all. It's incredible. You can have hours and hours of time where you don't hear a single noise event. But during the week, you have like A-10 warthogs flying 100 feet off the desert floor and bombing range practices and things like that. So when we start to hear stuff like that happening, that could also be like mining operations, things like that. That can automatically disqualify a place, because we don't want to send people to a place that they think is quiet and then all of a sudden they get buzzed by a fighter jet. That would be a bad look. How do we test for these places? Essentially, Fritz is really good at it. We use these really high sensitivity microphones. Fritz is one of them. We have a few others, as well as decibel meters. Decibels is how we measure sound pressure level, if that's not something you know already. And what we do is we measure data for 3 hours at a time, at least 3 hours at a time. And we do that for 3 days in a given week. So for instance, when I was in Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, we were there for a total of 5 or 6 days, I believe. And we collected data on 4 of those days. We like to try and do it all within 1 week, because that's when we can get there, and coming back multiple times a year is expensive and costly and, is environmentally difficult as well. But we try and do those 3 days within a 7-day period. We always collect our data 1 to 2 hours before sunrise to 1 to 2 hours after sunrise. The reason that is that the atmosphere is cleaner, so to speak. That sound travels so much better that time of day. So you end up being able to hear and process data from much farther away than in the heat of the day. It's also usually less windy at that time of day. So we try and find these locations to collect data that are also like relatively free from consistent sound. So we wouldn't collect data next to a river or in another, like next to a geologic feature or something like that. We want to find places that are relatively free from consistent sources of sound. And the final part, other than the sound recordings and the decibel level readings and the log of noise pollution events that happen, is kind of subjective, experiential notes on what the observer or what the tester, usually me and folks from our team, are experiencing in the moment. I'd said before that quiet is a thing, but it's also a feeling. And it's important to kind of recognize what that feeling is. I've been to places that give me the feeling of quiet that don't meet the Wilderness Quiet Park standard. So it's important to kind of note what you're feeling as well during this process. And I've worked with researchers before who say that quiet, that feeling of quiet, is a multi-sensory experience. So if you are in a quiet place, but you smell a sewage treatment plant, it's not going to feel very quiet to you. So it's important to kind of take into account all your senses when you're in these places to make sure that, yeah, it really does feel quiet as well as is actually quiet scientifically. I'm going to play a sound for you now because you don't want to hear me talk that much more, I guess. This is from an upcoming wilderness quiet park in northeastern Montana called American Prairie Reserve. American Prairie Reserve is a really amazing nonprofit organization, actually. They just had an article like a day or two ago about them published in the New York Times. They're working really heavily on bison reintegration into the plains to restore the natural migration patterns of the bison, because the bison actually have worked to help keep those landscapes intact and functioning and healthy for a long time. And bison were essentially exterminated by settlers to impact native communities. And American Prairie Reserve is doing a really great job trying to fix some of that. So here's a recording from the prairies of northeastern Montana. You'll hear some coyotes in this too. That recording is, all these recordings from American Prairie Reserve are really special to me. American Prairie Reserve frequently experiences multi-hour long noise-free intervals. And that is for a few different reasons. Mainly, they kind of are lucky where they exist in terms of where the air traffic patterns are. If you pull up a live air traffic map and look at where American Prairie Reserve is, planes just kind of skirt around it. They kind of just won the lottery in that regard. And also it's very, very remote. Unlike a lot of publicly accessible land that has kind of infrastructure to support tourism and like, recreation, there's not a lot of that in American Prairie Reserve. It's just kind of like a few hundred miles of dirt roads and protected land, and like a few campgrounds and a lot of dispersed camping. To give you an idea, there's a town in Montana called Malta, Montana, which is a super tiny little town. You drive for like 60 miles on dirt roads out of Malta, Montana, before you really get into the heart of American Prairie Reserve. I've spent multiple weeks on the reserve and working with them there, and it's a really special place. So if you're ever in northeastern Montana, worth checking out for sure, and just so lush with wildlife in the spring. Really, really incredible bird song. Some of the most incredible bird song I've ever heard. In that recording, there's like probably 15 different species of birds and coyotes and waterfowl and just everything. It's really incredible. So anyway, that's an example of a place I love that I've been to. And now on to another place I love that I've been to, which is Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. I was there last week of March in 2022. I was accompanied by my really good friend and colleague, Laura Giannoni. Laura is also a sound recordist and an acoustic ecologist. She's done a lot of amazing work. I have to give her big thanks for all the data that we collected and some of the sound recordings as well. Her and I worked really hard the week that we were there. kind of, yeah, get our boots on the ground and collect a bunch of data. So here's us. Let's see, this first photo is Laura at dawn near Fish Creek loop wash area, and then us in Mountain Palm Springs together as well, enjoying wind through the palms. So I think our main takeaways from our trip there was that Anza-Borrego Desert State Park is truly such a beautiful soundscape. It has so much to offer and so much diversity to offer. There's lots of different little pocket ecosystems throughout the park and really, really beautiful soundscapes. At times, it was so quiet that all we could hear was like blood rushing in our ears. So quiet that it goes below the threshold of what our decibel levels decibel meters can actually pick up, which is like below the threshold of human hearing. So when it's still and when you have a quiet moment, it's like, it's unbelievable. It really, really is. The other thing that I thought really stood out to me and is different from any place that I've ever been is that the community there in and around the park care so deeply about the soundscapes there. Yes, the community itself and the people who live in Borrego Springs that I met care about protecting the park and protecting the soundscapes. Folks from the Anza-Borrego Foundation have just been incredible partners in working to protect the soundscapes. But what's kind of was unique was that the state park staff itself has really exhibited almost like abnormal behavior in trying to protect the soundscapes. A lot of places I go to, resource managers who work for these parks and work for the land or work for the federal government obviously care, but it's like they have a lot of other stuff going on. They have a lot of stuff to worry about, a lot of issues to kind of tackle. What was really evident to me was how deeply each member of the park staff that I met really cared about this and exhibited tons of ways that they're doing work to protect the soundscape. Overall, our data suggested or kind of showed that it would not qualify for a wilderness quiet park, unfortunately, which was hard to balance with the feeling we got while we were there, which was that this is a quiet place. But unfortunately, the wilderness quiet park standard wasn't met for mostly one reason, which was the commercial air traffic, which I'll talk more about. But also there was military encroachment during our time. And when I say military encroachment, I'm talking about these kind of sudden onsets of noise pollution due to military activity in the area. But that's not to like say, okay, well, that's it. Goodbye. We're not going to do anything about this anymore. There's a lot of work to do and a lot worth working to protect and educate people on in the desert. So I'm going to talk more about like where we tested and what we found and things like that. So I have each of our 4 testing mornings kind of lined up here. Our first day was up Pinyon Mountain Road, which not sure how familiar folks are with the park. I'm assuming probably more familiar than myself, but we were kind of up at the top of the road right before it starts to go down the grade, really out in the middle of it. Day 2, we drove up to the end of Carrizo Canyon. Day 3, we did kind of an overnight in Fish Creek and Loop Wash, really super far out in the middle of nowhere. No one was around us or anything. And then day 4, we spent our last morning up in Coyote Canyon area. And each of those places sonically were so different. There were different birds, there were different plants, there was different sound from wind. Each place was so special and so different, and kind of worth spending more time. And we both wanted more time there for sure. Here's an example of kind of what some of our data looks like in the most kind of watered down version that I can give it. Which is we have our noise log here, which is just kind of a brief description of like, this is what I write down in my journal and in our noise logs, just noting plane at 646 or distant road or prop plane at 650, plane at 652, plane at 656. You'll see based on the timestamps, there's a lot of air traffic. And the sound file that you see there, you can see the air traffic in the sound file. You know, it's really evident when there's quiet versus when there's a noise event. What we end up doing is I kind of look at that sound file and then I look at my noise log. And when I'm not sure, like here, there's a distant road or prop plane is my note, I go back into the sound file and then I listen through really high fidelity equipment to be able to tell, yeah, that's a prop plane, or no, that's a tractor trailer on a road. Sometimes things sound the same. So this is kind of one example of some of the data that we collected in the morning at Carrizo Canyon. And you'll see the microphone system set up there, kind of up one of these little slot canyons there a little bit. It was a really, really beautiful morning. What I would say is that a lot of our mornings, we did have almost a 15-minute noise-free interval at times. Usually our first few minutes of recording, if we set up at 5 or 5:30, usually we'd get 10, 12, 13 minutes of a noise-free interval, and we'd be so excited. And then a plane would come, unfortunately. One thing I'll do is kind of go back to this map of the park. What we found, and the reason why you see our testing areas are kind of lined up north to south a bit, is that we kept finding flight paths into San Diego Airport, commercial air traffic patterns. One of them is north of the park, kind of outside of the boundaries, but not by too much. The way that sound works is that even if a plane is a little bit off on the horizon, the sound still will impact you. So it doesn't have to be traveling directly overhead for it to impact the soundscape. So then we move to the center of the park. There's another flight path that goes nearly over the center of the park, kind of directly over Borrego Springs. Those of you who live there might notice it occasionally. And then to the south of the park, just kind of south of Carrizo Canyon, it seems like there's another flight path into San Diego Airport. So it's kind of an unfortunate layout that we kept trying to find ourselves away from the flight path. And as soon as we'd find ourselves away from it, we'd kind of encounter a new one. And that's kind of what happens in a lot of places, unfortunately. So the other thing that we experienced, like I said previously, is that we had military encroachment and what I'd call misuse. And I use that term misuse lightly, and I'll explain why in a minute. But on pretty much each of our days there, we experienced what I would consider kind of an unacceptable military exercise happening over the state park. Military has operating areas that they're supposed to do exercises in. Those areas are usually not state parks. And each day we were there, we had what I'd call military misuse. So we had a C-130 fly a few hundred feet off the desert floor near Agua Caliente. There was really low altitude helicopter training over Coyote Canyon that lasted for 30 or 45 minutes. And then actually, I think it was later that day, we had 2 fighter jets fly up Coyote Canyon at really excessive speed, causing decibel levels over 85. And if 85 decibels doesn't mean much to you, it's like start up your lawnmower right next to you, and that's like 85 decibels. It's loud enough where you can't be exposed to that level of noise for too long because you'll experience hearing loss. Of course, it's not immediate. You'd have to experience 85 decibels for prolonged periods of time. That being said, it was really, really loud and definitely really disruptive to wildlife and to the visitor experience, I'd say for sure. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the military stuff because it's worth noting. This is an aviation map, so to speak, of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park and the areas around in the Salton Sea. So you'll see here kind of in the center of the screen, just a little bit up to the northwest is Borrego Valley and the Borrego Air Ranch. You'll see Borrego Springs there. There's a lot of data on this map, but this is the kind of map that pilots will use to enter navigational aids and things like that. You see kind of going north to south across the center of the map, you see this kind of dashed red line. And these labels that say Kane West MOA, Kane East MOA, restricted airbase, restricted Able Bravo MOA. All these things are military operating areas that exist kind of over the Salton Sea and to the west of the Salton Sea and southwest of the Salton Sea. The FAA is who dictates what airspace is, who gets to use airspace for what. MOAs are set aside for military to do their operations, to do training, things like that. On the map here, I've made some of these purple arrows, which I'm hoping pop against the weird dense map information, where each of those military encroachments happened. And you can see pretty clearly those are happening outside of the military operating area. One thing to note is up in the upper left-hand corner of the map here, there's two things called NOTAMs. There's a notice to airmen. One says, caution, military helicopter training below 6,000 feet above sea level. And the other says, pilots are requested to maintain a minimum altitude of 2,000 feet above ground level over sensitive wildlife areas. So this is just, I am not a pilot. I have very little experience operating an aircraft. But I look at maps like this a lot because they tell me about the different types of airspace in an area and what it's designated for. What's clear to me from looking at this map is that the military operating areas are close to the park, but they're not over the park. And what we saw with those low fighter jets and the low flying planes and the helicopter training is that those exercises are happening outside of the military operating areas over the state park. I spoke to park staff about this, and the park staff has been doing a really amazing work talking to the military about this. So it'd be easy to say like, oh, the park can do something about it. In my experience, park staff is really, they don't dictate any of the stuff. They have no power to keep airplanes out of the airspace over their park. I think it's like 8 feet above the ground is FAA territory. So above our national parks, state parks, things like that, there's really nothing that state park staff can do other than try and engage in meaningful conversation, which they have been doing and are doing a lot of. So it's like really important for me to kind of explain that the park staff has been doing so much work, and more work than I've ever seen a park staff do in engaging in conversations when stuff like this happens. So onto the fun stuff is now some more listening, and I want to share some sounds that we captured while we were there, as we wrap up here and then move towards question and answers. So this first sound is from Salvador Canyon area. This next one is Mountain Palm Springs, which is probably my favorite sound recording from our time there. You can hear the palm fronds blowing in the wind. And this last one I'm going to play is from Lower Willows area, and you'll hear the distant commercial aircraft in this recording if you listen really carefully. unfortunately, that morning that we spent kind of up in Coyote Canyon and near the Willows was full of a lot of air traffic, but also a lot of really beautiful bird song and coyote choruses. And there was a lot of beautiful stuff happening that morning. So what do we do with all this information? What does it mean? This is kind of what I had written up at the time when I gave my recommendations to the park and to the foundation and to the community members who were involved in this, and also still applies. The rerouting of commercial air traffic and private air traffic is very unlikely. I have tried to bark up that tree in some other places to no avail. So I generally don't recommend that people try and work with the FAA to reroute air traffic. If you're really committed and you really want to go for it, don't let me stop you, and I'd help in any way that I can. But it's really difficult because they're trying to juggle a bunch of balls at once, and the FAA is probably not going to reroute aircraft. What I'd say might be really helpful is to continue, and the park, again, has been doing this, park staff has been doing this, but the community as well, is to engage with local military officials on the use of the airspace over the park. I think that would make a big difference in the user experience and the wildlife experience in the park. I see here in the Q&A that someone said that there was helicopter training today as well. And it seemed to me like that military encroachment over the area is something that happens not infrequently. And while the park staff can do as much as they can, and they are doing as much as they can, starting to kind of figure out as a community what we can do to engage in meaningful conversation with the military who are doing these exercises is going to be important. You know, I firmly believe we need military training areas. This isn't to say we should stop military training, but I feel like military training should happen in certain areas, and then we should have sensitive wildlife areas be separate from where we train our military. And I think that's important not only for the wildlife, but also for our enjoyment of these areas. Something that we're continuing to do and will continue to do, which is kind of why we're here tonight, is to raise awareness about how special the soundscape is in the desert, and the things that we can do to kind of clue visitors into the soundscapes in Anza-Borrego. We have a lot of ideas of stuff to do, and a lot of really cool things in the works. But continuing to kind of educate people about why it's so special and why it's important, and to clue visitors into the listening experience that you get to have in Anza-Borrego Desert is something that we need to keep doing. And Quiet Parks International is like really committed to helping Anza-Borrego do this, and educate people and continue to preserve the soundscape. And one of the things that we're working on is a new program area called Quiet Conservation Areas. A quiet conservation area is different than a wilderness quiet park because a quiet conservation area doesn't have to be quiet. For wilderness quiet parks, it needs to be quiet for 15 minutes at a time. Quiet conservation areas look to recognize places that bring a quiet experience and that have the intent of preserving quiet, which Anza-Borrego Desert State Park certainly fits the bill for. So I'm like excited to report that we're really deep in the conversations with the state park, with the Anza-Borrego Foundation, with Quiet Parks folks, with other stakeholders about how we can work to get Anza-Borrego Desert State Park as a quiet conservation area. So that stuff is in the works. The other kind of neat thing about quiet parks is that because we're all volunteer, we need help, and we're always looking for help. So you can just send me an email, matt@quietparks.org, if you want to get involved, if you want to help in any way, whether it's in Anza-Borrego or in another place. If you want to learn more, if you want to help us try and protect quiet, you can. And we need people kind of all over the place. We have a really cool opportunity as well that I'm excited to announce. And this is kind of one of the first of its kind. Is that we are offering a quiet research retreat. This is a partnership between the Anza-Borrego Foundation, the State Park, and Quiet Parks International. It's going to take place March 24th through 26th. It'll be a weekend long, And the goal is that I will come out and we'll spend a weekend together doing what Laura and I did, essentially collecting data, listening, gathering information about soundscapes in the park. Our hope is that that work leads to more understanding of the kind of unique opportunities and threats that the soundscape has there. And I think this could appeal to a lot of different people. If you're interested in sound recording, it would be great. If you're interested in ecology and soundscape preservation, you'd also really enjoy this. But also if you're just interested in listening and mindfulness and going for some really early morning hikes in some quiet places and learning more about listening, this would also be a really good opportunity. So yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time just talking about quiet and listening. We're going to go for some really early morning walks and kind of sound recording walks and things like that, collect a bunch of data, and just have a really great time together. So this is a really unique opportunity that I'm really excited to be a part of. And I'll ask Sam, is there anything to mention here on the Quiet Research Retreat that I didn't mention?
You covered most of it. I guess I'll just reiterate that I'm really excited for this. We haven't done anything like this before, and I think it's going to be really special. And we're actually just going to keep it exclusive for people here in the webinar initially before opening it up to the general public. So I'm excited to work alongside Matt and learn about how he records these soundscapes.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun experience, and yeah, it's a pretty unique thing. So if you want to get a closer look at this stuff, or this stuff is really interesting to you, this is a great opportunity. And there's a link to register that's in the chat here. And you can always email Samantha at theabf.org with questions. But I've gone over my time a bit, so let's move to Q&A. Let me bring that
actually
back.
Do you mind? Yeah, before in a moment, we will open it up for Q&A. But first, I just want to say thank you, Matt. That was awesome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about this stuff. If you couldn't tell, I'm really excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I speak for many people when I say that I'm ready to head into the wilderness and sit in profound silence for a week.
Me too. Me too. Surprisingly, when we go out into the wilderness together, I do very little talking. So I can talk a lot when I'm prompted, and then I become very, very quiet.
It's a good variety of skill. So in a moment, like Matt said, we're going to ask you to gather your questions and type them into the Q&A box. And then you can also toggle on sound, unmute you essentially if you want to verbally add, and then Matt will respond verbally. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge everyone that is here. Thank you for coming, including Matt's mom, who is apparently here. And also give a huge thank you from all of us at the Anza-Borrego Foundation to several people who have already donated to our education programs. So thank you. All of the education programs at the Anza-Borrego Foundation are funded and supported by donations from the public and through our membership base. And this includes things like this webinar, but also in-person lecture series and guided hikes in the state park, field method lessons in the state park, really cool programs. This is the first time that we've offered this pay what you can structure, which you might have noticed when you were registering. And it's also the beginning of a series of webinars that we plan to offer throughout the season and into the summer, where we plan to share research with the public that is going on in Anza-Borrego. So stay tuned. And if you haven't yet and now feel called to support future programs like this one, I invite you to click the link in the chat to donate to us. And you can also shop at the state park store in the mall or in the visitor center and the online store. All the proceeds of the store directly support education programs. And lastly, one last thing, order of business, is that we have a survey for you to take when you get a moment. This helps us improve our programming. It helps let us know what you are interested in seeing. So Jamie has just posted the link in the chat, and it's short and sweet. So when you'll also receive an email with that. We'd be really grateful if you could take that survey. And now on to questions.
Great. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. And that way folks can see me and Fritz in more full screen. And I see some in the Q&A here, and I'll just kind of go in order of how they came in. First question from Tara. Have you partnered, or do you have plans to partner with research entities to correlate your soundscape data with observed changes in wildlife? Short answer is yes. A lot of the observed changes in wildlife due to noise pollution are happening at the university level. There's some really amazing research coming out of like University of Idaho, Fort Collins, that kind of specifically look at the effects that noise pollution has on wildlife. So we have researchers on our team, specific places that are interested. Like if I can find researchers who are doing this kind of interesting wildlife work in Anza-Borrego, the goal is to share all of our data in any way that's helpful. So, but it's very location specific, and not necessarily something that we don't have like a research project specifically for wildlife in each place that we visit. So I hope that answers your question. Ashley asked, the benefits of quiet to humans is great. Is there similar finding regarding the benefits of quiet to wildlife? Yeah, wildlife evolved in quiet. It's only in the past, 50 to 100 years that we have combustion engines, really rampant around all over the place. So wildlife evolved in quiet. We also evolved in quiet. So noise is a really new thing that we're all experiencing. And yeah, wildlife needs quiet to live happy, prosperous lives, to communicate, to find food, to find shelter, to find mates. Any disruption to that quiet can be detrimental to wildlife. And there's really interesting kind of data to support that. There's a cool project called the Phantom Road Project, done by a researcher by the name of Jesse Barber. And if you just look up Phantom Road, Jesse Barber, you'll see he like put a fake road using speakers in the middle of a wildlife area and documented what it did to the wildlife in the area. It's a really amazing piece of research. Richard asks, how is wind factored into the basics of wilderness sound recording? A little wind sounds good in leaves, but a lot of wind effectively cancels any sounds of quiet. And wind as a weather property varies greatly in frequency and strength, depending on the location. Does this get considered in evaluating a potential quiet park? Richard, wind is like, I spend so much time thinking about the sound of wind. Never did I think I would spend so much time considering the different sounds of wind through different things. It's one of the reasons why we try and not collect data on windy mornings. It's also one of the reasons why dawn is such a great time, because even on windier days, dawn can really be the quietest time of day in terms of wind. So if I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning to do this data collection and it's really windy, I go back to bed, because it really impacts the microphones and our ability to hear for any sort of length of time, or sorry, distance. So we really try and be cognitive of what wind is doing to how sound travels, and it affects how sound travels. So yeah, we really try and take that into consideration when we're doing these evaluations. But recording the sound of wind through different types of leaves and plants and vegetation and rocks is like what I do during the day. Once we're done collecting our data, usually we have some breakfast, maybe take a nap because we've been up since 2 or 3 in the morning hiking. And then we just walk around with our microphones and record cool sounds. And oftentimes that's wind, especially when we're in the desert. So I have wind recordings of like every species of cactus in the United States, wind passing over saguaro cactuses and organ pipe cactuses and barrel cactuses. And it's been a really fun part of spending time in the desert, is listening to how wind passes through all these different types of cactus. So thank you for that question about wind. Yes, he realizes this is something else to listen to. Great. Any more questions? Anyone feel like they want to come off mute and ask a question? Oh, here's another one from Ashley. In beach areas, the sound of wind and waves can feel like a noise canceling. Have you noticed any actual natural noise canceling events? Yeah, there are. I notice it most in the heat of the day, and the desert's a really cool place to witness this, is that sound doesn't like to travel in really hot environments. So I've been like out in the middle of the desert in the heat of the day when it's, like 90 degrees or something, and I've like seen a bird calling from a bush, and it sounds muddled, even though I can see it and it's relatively close. The way that wind and heat kind of all interact with the sound do impact it quite a bit. I like to think about sound. Sound is like a pressure wave, just like any type of physical wave. So like when you throw a rock into a still pond and watch the waves ripple out from that rock, that's exactly how sound travels through an environment. So if you can imagine that there's wind across a pond and you throw a pebble into it, you're not going to see the effects of that pebble. Those waves move as effectively across the water as when it's still or something like that. There are so many interesting things that happen to sound as a result of wind, heat, cold, water, all these different things. If you've ever been on a body of water, maybe in a boat or something, and hear people talking what seems like right next to you, and then you look and there's a boat like half a mile away, it's because water will actually like create a pressure gradient that keeps the sound traveling super effectively, making it sound like people are super close to you. And there are lots of times, every time I go out sound recording, still, even if I were to just go around my neighborhood right now, I'd find something really cool that to focus on that's happening with the sound. And that's not just because I'm a sound nerd. I think it's because I really like listening. And I think if we can all learn to listen more and appreciate listening more, there's so much cool stuff happening at any given moment. So much to appreciate and to dissect.
If anyone wants to make comments, ask questions verbally to Matt, I'm happy to unmute you.
And there's like a raise hand function down at the bottom here that'll alert us. Haley says, how does freshly fallen snow affect sound? Haley is in Duluth and she's biased because she's my partner, but actively falling snow can cloud sound. So when you have like a really heavy snowstorm, it's always really quiet. And that's, I think lots of people can appreciate when you have a really heavy snowstorm, you just feel, it just feels quieter. It's really insulative. So sound doesn't travel super well through snow, but sound does like cold too. So once you have freshly fallen snow and it's cold out, sound can do really interesting things because it's cold. But everyone knows the quiet of a snowstorm, and I think it's one of the most beautiful things. Nancy, hi Nancy. Nancy is special shout out to Nancy, who's been a really amazing partner in our fight to protect quiet in Anza-Borrego. Nancy asks, what are you doing to heighten awareness among the general public about your mission? Nonprofits are hard, and I know all the folks from the ABF will resonate with me, but Quiet Parks in general, Quiet Parks International, we have a lot of great press opportunities. So today we had a piece on CNN where we were cited, and last week we had a piece in Travel and Leisure. And so broadly, we're doing a good job of spreading the mission of Quiet, and we see a lot of great feedback from folks when those articles and when those podcasts come out. Specifically in Anza-Borrego and Borrego Springs, we're kind of coming up with the plan. the ABF has been a really amazing organization to work with. And I know, yes, they're sponsoring this, but I'm not being paid to tell you how great they are. They really care about educating the public about this. And for years now, we've been working together to try and work through this stuff. And what's the best way to reach out to the public and educate the public and children about the importance of quiet, and how special listening in Anza-Borrego is. Yeah, we're working on it, and there's going to be some really exciting stuff happening soon. I think one of the things that we decided to do a few months ago was have this webinar to try and get more folks involved, and subsequently have this research retreat. But as we get into the new year here, there's some really exciting conversations happening about what we're going to do specifically in Anza-Borrego Desert to kind of raise awareness and get folks out and listening. Ashley says, I love going to Anza-Borrego to observe the diversity of bees. The different species of bees buzz differently. When you're distinguishing sounds, how specific do you get in identifying the origins of a sound? I love this question. It's so good. Sometimes I get really lost in it. Sometimes I'll be like, what species of bee is that? And that's always really fun, but sometimes distracts me from counting noise events. Yeah, every insect buzzes differently, even like at different stages of their life, like in the larval stage, or I'm no insect specialist, but as insects grow in the same species, they sound different. So it's always really interesting. Like I usually do a species identification on all the birds. Obviously, any mammals that I'm hearing, I do species identification on. Insect identification is one that I know people who specialize in. I don't specialize in it myself, but you can always tell the difference between a horsefly and a bee, or a mosquito and a gnat. And those things are always really fun to kind of focus in on. It's all information. Like sound is all information. When you're there listening, and if you close your eyes, you'll be so surprised about how much information you can pick up. You don't even have to be a great birder to understand, like, oh, that's a big bird, or that's a small bird, or that's a happy bird. Oh, that's an angry bird. You can pick up all that stuff just from listening. You don't have to know it's a Western meadowlark singing in the prairie. You don't have to know what species of bees are there in order to start deriving a lot of cool information from the sounds you're hearing. If you're into identifying different types of bees in sound recordings, I have some sound recordings to send you because I'm very curious.
Richard has his hand up. Do we want to? He's had his hand up for a while.
Great.
I'm gonna
let's do that.
Allow you to talk. Richard, you feel free to talk.
Oh, you might have to unmute yourself, Richard.
I think you have to, yeah.
Great.
Okay. So can you see my question that I put in the Q&A?
Yes, I do see it here.
I wondered if you've experienced this, or if anyone else has experienced people hiking in nature with their music on.
Oh, Richard. Oh my God, my friend. Yeah, it's a thing. People are doing it. I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about why this is, why people decide to go for hikes and play music while they're hiking. I usually notice it's usually younger people. And usually those people are, I would say, not like they're not frequenting, like hiking isn't a part of their weekly routine. It's like something that they get to do a few times a year. I think it's always important to me to recognize that we all get to enjoy these places a little bit differently. So someone who wants to drive their Jeep on Jeep trails through Anza-Borrego Desert isn't superior or inferior to someone who wants to hike through the wilderness area. We're all out there trying to enjoy nature. But I think it's important to recognize when someone else's use of an area degrades everyone else's. So if you're going to drive a super loud Harley Davidson right next to a wilderness area, that might degrade someone else's experience. Maybe there's something to learn there. If you're going to blast music as you're on a hiking trail, that could also degrade someone else's experience. But I think the reason why people do it is that they're uncomfortable in unfamiliar sonic environments.
Wow.
I also, when I go to a new place, feel some discomfort because I don't know what I'm hearing or exactly what I'm gonna hear. People like to surround themselves with familiarity when they're in uncomfortable situations or different situations. So I think people are playing music because, you know, music is great. I love music, but also it's a familiar thing that they can bring to the environment, and they're not really clued in to how beautiful it is to listen to wind through the different types of trees or the different types of bees that might be buzzing around you. I think the more we can do to educate people on, hey, like you should pause the music, like listen to that gust of wind. How cool is that? I hope that people stop doing that. It's hard for me to not, I used to be really angry at people who were doing that. And I've tried to stop being angry and have more compassion, but it's difficult. And if anyone on this call is playing music while they're hiking, please stop. Don't do
Unlikely.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I just wish you could find famous Grammy-winning pop stars to start endorsing the idea of quiet as a genre of music for people to listen to.
Yeah, well, I have to say that it's becoming more and more mainstream, so to speak. People are talking about this more and more. Not, you know, maybe not like pop stars, but like Yo-Yo Ma's latest project is all about nature and sound. There's a lot of really high level people, you know, like high profile people, I should say, who are starting to focus on sound and its importance. So I think we're on our way, hopefully.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. I try to another question from the Q&A. I try to practice quiet sections on suburban trails. Would love to see that normalized for an intro to quiet. Yeah, I think spending intentional time in quiet is something that we just don't get to do ever as humans. We never give ourselves quiet time. Even though I work in quiet, I still like, I have meetings throughout the day. I like to listen to podcasts. I get in my car, I put on music. Like, the more time we can spend intentionally engaging with listening and with quiet, I think the more aware of our surroundings we are, the more joy that we end up feeling. So it's I like to tell people all the time, like, you know, quiet's something that you can have any time. You just have to make time for it. And I think it's important to recognize that, like, getting out to a beautiful state park like Anza-Borrego is a privilege. And not everyone can do that. So it's important to be able to bring quiet to people wherever they're at, which is, you know, one of the reasons I really love our Urban Quiet Parks program, and the work that our director, Ulf Bowman, is doing in that regard is just really trying to bring quiet to people in these urban areas, because quiet shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be a privilege. It should be something we can all have. So thanks for that. Sanjeev said, not to mention drones. Oh my God, the drones, my friend. Also, I actually get angrier at the drones than I do at the people playing music. Drones are really difficult. Thankfully, like, national parks don't allow drones. A lot of state parks don't allow drones. What I'd say is, if you see someone flying a drone in a place where they're not allowed to, like, know where you're allowed to fly drones is important. But I have no problem reporting people or asking people to take drones down in sensitive wildlife areas. Not to be mean about it, but just saying, like, hey, drones actually really disturb wildlife and can spook large mammals and disrupt bird flight paths and things like that. Would you mind taking it down? And if people are indifferent to that, I have no problem calling a ranger and just being like, hey, there's some folks flying drones. Would you mind coming to let them know? And reporting it. And then also, usually when you report something to any sort of federal or state park staff, they log it. So they'll be able to see, oh, we had 200 complaints of drone noise in our state park this year. So that's an important thing to do as well. I wish you many, many miles of hiking with no drones over your head. Nancy asks, is there a way to listen to your soundscapes uninterrupted, like on Apple Music or something like that? They're so beautiful. Thank you. As of right now, they're not publicly posted anywhere. But that's something that I would like to fix, especially for the Anza-Borrego folks. So that's going to be part of definitely the education kind of component that we're going to hope to roll out soon. And I'm sure we can figure out a way to post some of these longer soundscapes, maybe through the ABF or something. So that's a good note. I'm gonna write that down here to figure out a way to kind of share some of these longer clips of sound with you all, so that way you can listen to uninterrupted sounds.
Yeah, and I'll continue to work with Matt on that, how to make that available on our website, most likely, or potentially a private YouTube channel.
Great. AM asks, beautiful, thoughtful answers. Thank you. How can we best support the movement? I think you're doing it. You're attending these events. ABF is, again, a really fantastic organization who's really dedicated to this work in the state park there. So supporting them, if it's financial, if it's any other way that you can, is really great, really helpful. Quiet Parks International is also a 501c3. You can log on to our site, find out more about us. We're always looking for help, financial or otherwise. So if you're somewhere and you just want to talk about sound and figure out what you can do, we can hop on. And I actually forgot to include my contact info, but my email is just matt@quietparks.org. So you can send me an email and we can talk. But yeah, even just engaging with our websites, engaging with the content, again, donating if you can, but if not, there's lots of other ways that nonprofits love to have people help. So we're happy to be in touch. And Samantha just actually dropped my email in the chat, so that's great. Thank you for that. Redo and Judith Kramer ask, can you say something about the difference between natural silence and noise canceling headphone silence? Thanks. So silence in a natural area, it feels a lot different. I love noise canceling headphones. I'm wearing obviously really big headphones now. I have probably 3 or 4 different pairs of noise canceling headphones that I bring with me everywhere. If you ever saw a screenshot of the Quiet Parks International board meeting, it's so funny. We should be sponsored by a noise canceling headphone company because we're all in noise canceling headphones all the time. I swear our president showers in his noise canceling headphones, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. What you end up feeling when you're in a quiet place, a natural quiet place, and are experiencing natural silence is this really interesting kind of ability to hear for literally miles around you. And that's not an exaggeration. When you're in a naturally quiet place, your acoustic horizon becomes just infinite. Not necessarily infinite, but you can hear what's happening 5 miles, 10 miles away from where you're at in a circle sometimes. So I've heard noise intrusions. Like I've been in a naturally silent place. This happened in the mountains of Nevada. I was up in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada, and it was so quiet and so still. There was no wind. It was dawn. It was just perfectly still, and there's very little bird activity. It was just like deafening silence. And I heard a freight train, this really, really low rumbling noise. And I was like, where could that possibly be coming from? I'm like in the middle of a mountain range with no roads for like so long around me. And I ended up looking at a map, and the nearest freight train rail was 15 miles away from where I was. So you get this sense of scale when you're in a naturally quiet area that's so much different than just around your ears. And you know, noise canceling headphones are great because they deaden sound that's coming in. but they don't expand your field of vision or hearing, similar to what like a pair of binoculars can do. Like looking at a bird on a tree branch, 50 feet away is beautiful. If you have a really nice pair of binoculars, looking at that bird, it takes on totally new meaning. And that's what I think natural silence can do for us, is it can really bring us closer and more aware of all the things happening in the environment around us. And just listening in general can do that. Our ears are so powerful and so underutilized. The amount of information at any given point that you have coming into your ears it's vast, and much more than you have coming into your eyes. You can hear behind you with your eyes closed. You can hear through walls. You can hear over hills. Ears are so cool. Hearing is so cool. It can show you so much about your world. Great.
Well,
I think that's all the questions I see, and I know we're kind of ending on time here. So yeah, my final thoughts are, if anyone else has anything else they want to talk about, send me an email. I'm like very accessible. I spend a lot of time sitting in this room talking to an imaginary microphone head. So I love talking with people. Please send me an email, and let's catch up for sure. And just big thank you to the Anza-Borrego Foundation, to the state park itself, for having me, for working with Quiet Parks. We're really so lucky to be here. I'm so lucky to be here. So thanks so much.
thanks, Matt. Someone asked if they'll get the recording, and I assume you mean of this presentation. We have recorded the webinar, and so we can make this available on the website. So stay tuned for a follow-up email, and we'll alert you to how that's going to be available.
Great.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure, we have a lot of work to do, so we'll be talking soon.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.